Let's continue our Vietnam trip today with Ha Long Bay and Ninh Binh. We'll start in Ha Long Bay. You can stay on the mainland and take day trips on smaller boats. Or you can do what we did, stay on a ship that sails around the bay and explore from the ship. It's definitely more fun to stay on a ship. It's both a more laid-back and immersive way to see the bay. Some of the ships are very nice. Ours was essentially a 14-room, 4-star hotel at sea. With this size and larger, you're ferried out by a tender to your ship, and then the tender comes along with you as you sail around the bay and use the ship as a base, and you use the tender to explore. There was a big typhoon that hit a year or two before we were there, so we could still see remnants, but they're recovering well. Ha Long Bay is clearly one of the most famous sites in Vietnam. It's on everyone's must-see list. And other than just being beautiful, it's the karst formations that make it so iconic. These towers of stone that stick straight up out of the sea like fingers are as interesting as they are striking. They don't really exist in that many places on Earth. So what are they? As I understand it, essentially, they're just eroded limestone. And on its surface, no pun intended, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Texas is full of limestone, and we don't have anything that looks like that. And that's partly what makes them so interesting. When you think of erosion, you probably think of mechanical erosion, sandy wind and water grinding on stone, wearing it away. And that happens here too. But here you also have a different type of erosion, chemical erosion. You see, limestone is particularly vulnerable to acid. The acidity in water, particularly in certain climates, eats away at the stone, but only at certain parts of the stone. And that's another interesting thing about limestone. It's varied, very varied. Its composition, depending on the clay, silica, iron contents, and the density of all these things, makes some portions of the stone much more susceptible to being eaten by the acid in the water, and others virtually immune. Then you have the stratification, the layers. When limestone is flat, water eating into it can't get too deep into crevices, past more immune layers. But if you turn it on its side, upend it, water worms its way down into crevices, holes, and valleys, and eats away rivers and passageways that eventually come out somewhere else. Remember, not just typical mechanical erosion, but it's the chemical erosion. Everything is prone to mechanical erosion, but limestone also has this chemical erosion. And we build with this stuff. Some of the greatest structures ever built by man are built with limestone. The Great Pyramid of Giza, the Colosseum, Notre Dame, Westminster Abbey, my bathroom. I built my bathroom out of travertine stone, which is limestone. It was supposedly good enough for the Romans, so why wouldn't I? But is this what's going to happen to my bathroom? Well, yes, limestone does this. Have you ever noticed how travertine stone has pits? Those little holes, the porous lattice? That's where water has eaten away at a chemically vulnerable spot in the stone. So should we be worried? And why did we build with this stuff if this is what it does? Time. Time is why we're okay to build with this stuff. I don't have the chutzpah to think that I'm going to be here, or my house for that matter, or even the Colosseum, in the time it takes for these processes to happen. The stones in the Colosseum or Westminster Abbey or my bathroom can show the wear of mechanical erosion or the corrosiveness of simple water, but in millimeters. Even the Colosseum is a blip in the timeline of the processes that make these amazing mountains and tunnels. and that makes them even more awe-inspiring to be enveloped by. This same basic process happens all over the world. But with karst formations, it's just put on display so uniquely that you can't help but marvel at them. Nature demands your attention and demonstrates what it can do, because we're usually too caught up in nonsense to stop and pay attention. The first time I ever saw karst formations was in Phang in southern Thailand, many years ago. And I was just mesmerized by these wild stones sticking straight up out of the sea. We can build the world's greatest monuments and admire them for millennia, and the timeline of their erosion matters so little. When you admire the monuments of nature, formed by that same erosion over so many millions of years, it puts things in perspective. The scale of what was eroded away forms the landscape, and the timeline of its erosion is measured in miles, not millimeters. Both Halong Bay and Ninh Binh are in northern Vietnam. Halong is here on the coast, over 1,600 islands, and Ninh Binh is farther south and inland. They call Ninh Binh Halong Bay on land, but some of its most beautiful scenery is seen from the rivers in Trong An via little hand-rowed boats. It's a much quieter and more close-up experience here. There's a huge labyrinth of waterways, caves, rice fields, and marshes among the karst formations. And I wasn't surprised to learn that there are a lot of prehistoric archaeological sites here. I kept thinking as we were marveling at the scenery that this must have been the perfect hidden and defensible land for your tribe to hide from marauding bands or something. It would take months to learn your way around even the smallest area here. And I couldn't help but wonder how many places are only accessible via a little cave or thin strip of land or inlet, hiding a whole valley somewhere. There are several temples scattered throughout the complex, which were nice breaks to get out and stretch your legs, and it brought home that feeling of peaceful isolation. But the highlights in Trong An are definitely seen from the water. The longest accessible known cave is 1,000 meters long. There were a couple areas where you had to duck your head and get a little low, but none of it is too claustrophobic. And one place that was pretty interesting was the set of the movie Kong Skull Island. It's a recreation of a tribal village, and it's still there and really fits into the landscape pretty well. It was kind of cool. There are so many different fascinating angles to Vietnam. There's obviously the history of the Vietnam War and their now changing relationship with France and the US. There's the whole push and pull between communism and capitalism. There's the whole economic rising industrial manufacturing tech power thing. But I think I was a little surprised by the geography and geology. I mean, I really shouldn't be. Vietnam is 1,000 miles tall. That's a little more than Texas, for example, but much less land area. In some places, Vietnam's only 30 miles wide. It's enough, though, to give you variety. I knew the north was cool and the south was always hot, but for 1,000 miles of distance, comparatively, that's not much variation. Texas, again for comparison, varies much more for that distance. But there are so many more places in Vietnam that I would call beautiful. But we are talking about large distances here. Hanoi to Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, is 1,050 miles. That's New York to Miami, or Dallas to Minneapolis, or Arlington, Virginia to New Orleans. That's a haul. The landscape was interesting, though, and beautiful. This area and Halong Bay, for example, both sit at the end of the Red River Delta, or Hong River as they call it. When you think of deltas in Vietnam, I think of the Mekong. which we'll see later. It's one of the largest in the world. But the Red River Delta up here is pretty large too. Its delta is about the size of the Mississippi rivers. But for some reason, I think the Mississippi is more like the Mekong, and the Red River Delta would be more like the Po River Valley in Italy. I don't know exactly why. Maybe it's just that they're both in the top of the country in this expanded head to a tall, thin country with rivers flowing south and east. That's stupid, I know, but it does remind me more of that system than the Mekong. And this area, even when we were on the rivers, was nothing like the Mekong. It had a totally different feel. It is much prettier. The whole area was just stunning. And like many times in my life, I found myself just wanting to admire the scenery and for everyone to just stop talking. That's one thing that was nice about being on these little boats. You were just a little farther away from people most of the time. And you could really just admire the scenery without some random person just talking away about some useless nonsense.
We see the sunset. It was insane.
Kind of like you watching this video and wondering why I don't just shut up and let you admire the scenery. And honestly, that's actually usually why I'm talking in these videos, to cover up the noise and racket that usually comes with shooting video. So when I got to these last few clips and they were quiet, I was glad for the opportunity to just let you hear it in peace, because that's when this area was at its best.